Welcome, everybody, to the Crucible, our weekly discussion focusing on topics that we find important as secular humanists. I'm your host, CeaseToKnow, and joining me tonight is our co-host, Borg Skeptic, and our guest tonight is CeaseToKnow. How's everybody doing tonight?
Doing fine, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Now, before we get started, I'd like to say hi to everybody out in watching, and definitely want to recommend that if this is your first time on this channel, please remember to hit that subscribe button. If you like what you see, make sure you come back, and we will be sharing more content from the Promethean movement. Now, with all that said, let's go ahead and take a moment and have our guest introduce himself and tell us a little bit about, what you're into.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it. I go by CeaseToKnow. I do a weekly podcast on YouTube called Axioms on Trial, where we evaluate different perspectives and different philosophies, often to do with religion, but not just religion. Like we have talked to scientists, philosophy scholars, theologians, and occasionally we'll host debates, different types of conversations, and that kind of thing. I would say my core interests are music and philosophy. So I'm currently finishing up my master's degree in philosophy. I'm sort of runs in the family. Like my father was a philosophy professor. I'm sort of following the same footsteps. And my interests in philosophy are pretty much all over the place. I would say the main one is phenomenology, which really is a study about whether or not we can talk about subjective experience in an objective way. Like, is there a nature to experience? And I'm very interested in philosophy of mind, philosophy of language, how both shape the way that we see the world. And then, secondary things like ethics and political philosophy are also interests of mine. But so that's basically it.
Awesome. And so when you are done and basically kind of out in the real world, what do you plan on doing with all that?
Well, I guess my answer is twofold. On a personal level, I think philosophy is philosophy gets a bad rap for not being practical. Mm-hmm. A lot of people think that it's all just, mental exercises and sort of random speculation, but that's really just not understanding the field. From my perspective, it's an extremely practical, and to think critically and to think rationally is incredibly useful for how you then interact with the world and come to understand yourself within it. And so for me, it's philosophy like existentialism has helped me tremendously in deriving meaning from my experiences. Recognizing that when you go through somewhat of a bad time, that it's temporary, that you can make something out of that. Like, it doesn't have to define you or destroy you. You can embrace all the parts of life and build something upon that. And so some of these views I've gotten from Buddhist philosophy. Some of these views have gone from Nietzschean philosophy, there was some overlap there. So I think on a personal level, it's very instrumental to understanding your place in the world. And then outside of that, I'm probably going to be teaching. I'm looking to hopefully teach at the university level. Mm-hmm. Although I do think that philosophy should be taught as young as high school, maybe even middle school. Yeah. Because I'm very concerned with the educational system in this country. I'm from I'm originally from Italy, but I live in the U.S. And what I see is all, the way that it functions now is people are taught to memorize things or to care just about how much money you're making in the bank, and not really, aren't really learning how to think critically, how to think deeply. I think it really is detrimental to one's own well-being. And so, I think philosophy can help break those walls down.
Absolutely. So yeah, I totally agree. Like you said, one of the problems with our education system here in the States is that they focus more on memorization than actual learning. Is there something that you feel would be like, especially at the middle school level, would be an easy way to get kids started into using critical thinking skills? That I fear that it might be something that certain students might struggle in, where other students do well in. So, is there something that everybody could begin practicing and learn, and actually start those skills early enough without having to dive too deep into philosophy?
Yeah, I would say on a very basic level, just an introduction to epistemology. So, like, what are fallacies?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Try to keep it simple. Don't go into like complex logic or anything like that. Like that's for way later. But just very basic. And just because you feel something is true doesn't make it true. How do we try to justify what we believe, and is there a way to do that? And it doesn't have to be that much in depth, but just enough to sort of set the ground rules for what rationality is, how it's understood in the field, and then just little taste of philosophy here and there, and what are some of these the views held in the field, and yeah, of course some people are going to struggle, but at least people are going to struggle regardless, right?
Right.
And at least I think along with epistemology, different forms of existentialism, like you're not necessarily going to be thinking about your mortality at 15, but I did, and it may be helpful to some people to know that there, at least that there is knowledge out there that can help you through these thoughts and concerns about your life and your place in the world.
Yeah, I know. Like it's not necessarily a new problem with the education system. Back in my day, and I'm definitely kind of one of the old people in this room. They never taught anything like that. So like just critical thinking, epistemology, and stuff like that. I never even heard these terms until honestly I was in college, and even then, I'm an art major, so that didn't really necessarily apply to me. But even for somebody like me, what you're saying is that these are crucial skills that everybody should learn. So everybody should actually have some, even if it's a basic level of this education.
For sure, and I think in other ways philosophy does translate into art. Whether it's just a question of what is art and what it is that you're doing, but also how to inform your own growth as an artist, and how to find your voice. Because I do art as well, and yeah, it's and the more your mind expands to thinking about life, the easier it becomes to then apply your particular methodology of how to express yourself in a way that can reach more people, or in a way that can be more satisfying to you as an individual. I think it's kind of like a domino effect. It all kind of informs each other. And
Absolutely. Katie, I feel like I've been talking way too much, so I want to give you a chance to ask.
Well, I was wanting to ask about, so with like philosophy, obviously we're talking about, critical thinking skills and things like that. Um, how much of an impact do you think that theology has on the ability to critically think in the modern world?
Yeah, I think, it's. I'm not saying that there aren't very deep, intellectual thinkers who are religious, because there are.
Hmm.
But I think ultimately their perspective is based on a number of different fallacies. Like I don't think that the religious perspective can really be justified ultimately. There are some attempts are to do so are better than others. But overall, outside of actual scholarship, most people who are religious, they lack that ability to honestly look at why it is they believe what they believe. They want something to be true, and they find different ways to sort of confirm those beliefs. It's like that's what bias is, right? I mean, the amount of times where I've talked to people who say, "Well, things couldn't be this way unless God did it." Okay, well, justify that claim, and they never can. It's always like, "Go read the Bible." Like, well, I've read the Bible and I probably know it better than you, and it just it's I spent my life trying to find common ground with people who see the world differently than I do. But as I'm getting older, I'm finding myself less and less patient with sort of the religious narrative and the laziness, the intellectual dishonesty, the lack of recognition that these texts that people hold so as sacred, they're the claim, they're not the evidence. And so, I'm not sitting here claiming that I know God doesn't exist or that miracles can't happen. But I'm going to require a very strong level of evidence in order for me to accept those claims. And if you can't provide that, then it's fair game for me to call you out on that and criticize you for beliefs that you can't ultimately really justify. So yeah, I find religion to be very problematic because at best it's irrational, and at worst it's immoral.
Yeah.
And so that's my perspective.
That's interesting because so many theists use philosophy as kind of their go-to to actually justify the rationality of their belief within religion. So if you feel that they're not using philosophy properly to justify that belief, is it because they're just literally trying to put in their particular deity in places where it doesn't belong in just the thought process, or is it more of just that they're not using the process properly?
I would say both. I mean, I think it depends. I mean, how do I say this? The label religious is so vague that it fits such a wide spectrum of different types of people. I mean, you have those that are dogmatic. They've been raised in the church. Their family has been feeding them this nonsense their whole lives, and they just can't imagine life as anything other than this dogma. Then you have those that are quite more deep than that, who do understand philosophy and try to use philosophy to sort of support their claims. You find that less, and usually it's quite outdated philosophy, like
Okay.
the five proofs, for example. The Thomism that a lot of people think very seriously, and I think it's based on a lot of misconceptions about physics and causality. But you have people that can reason, but I think ultimately are driven by wishful thinking rather than what is reasonable to believe. Like anybody that is really deep within epistemology, you're going to find it hard to talk about certainty in most contexts. Because really what philosophy does when done right is it deconstructs your assumptions about the world, and you're left realizing that really wisdom is recognizing how little you know. You know, how much of what you take for granted is actually quite open-ended and not nearly as concrete as you think it is. And I think one concern people have is that without religion, then we would fall into more relativism. That we need
Right.
God, or we need the religious narrative to justify why evil is evil and why good is good. And again, this is just not looking at these issues deeply enough. Because the deeper you get in academia, the less religious people are, and yet look at the surveys like Phil Papers and other surveys that have been done even in the last couple of months. Most people in academia are more realists, so they believe in objective moral truth outside of a religious perspective. Now, yes, there's also a large chunk of academia that's postmodern and views morality in a relative way as social constructions. And I'm writing my thesis on why postmodernism is, to a large degree, self-defeating. Although there are some aspects that are valuable, but for the most part, it's not good. It's pretty garbage. But yeah, it really, we have hundreds and hundreds of years of philosophy that's put in the groundwork to show why morality can be retained, even if there isn't some celestial authority to order us to what is right and wrong. And so it's just a matter of looking into these issues a little bit deeper.
We have a question from the chat for you. Cat the Humanist is asking, could you give examples of poor or weak logical arguments?
Yeah, so let me think on the spot here how I would say this. Well, for example, when religious people say, if you ask a religious person, how do you know God exists? And they say, well, the Bible tells me so. Well, how do you know that the Bible is the word of God? Well, because God revealed that to us. Well, that's entirely circular. Like, you haven't justified anything there. You sort of just presuppose that. So that wouldn't work. Or things like the fallacy from design. So the famous example. You see a painting, and you know that it was made by a painter, and therefore you see the universe, and so the painting is complex, and it required a designer. The universe is complex, so there must be a designer. Well, this is fallacious because two things sharing one quality doesn't mean they share all qualities. So, for example, a watch is complex, and it was made in the 16th century. I don't know if that's exact, but I'm just throwing a number out there. The universe is complex. Doesn't mean the universe was made in the 16th century. Like, these are just sort of basic fallacies that people make. And you want to try to really keep your emotion and wishful thinking out of your justifications.
Okay.
You want to make sure that your conclusions follow from your premises. And it takes time to build those skills, but that's why I think it's so important to start at a younger age.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much for that answer. I hope that
Thanks, Kat.
was answered your question, Kat.
Yeah. Another question kind of based off of that. So if you're talking to somebody and they'd use like a weak argument or something like that, what do you find is the best way to kind of explain to them why you find the argument unacceptable? Because a lot of times it seems like when people are talking to somebody who's got this emotional stake in like a religion or everything like that, and they're using these type of arguments. When you try to explain to them, "Well, I don't see the logic in this," then they just kind of take you along that same circle again, sometimes explaining that same exact argument, just slightly changing the words. Is there a good way to engage these people and explain without necessarily having to know exactly a lot about it?
I mean, it's really hard. It's really hard because it depends on how honest the person you're talking to is engaged in the conversation, like how dogmatic they are. Some people you're not going to be able to reach through logic. Like you can show them, hey, this is this fallacy or that fallacy, and you can give them examples of why they wouldn't accept their own reasoning in other contexts. And ultimately, if they want their belief to be true more than anything, they're just gonna shut what you're saying out, and they're gonna repeat the same things. And at that point, to me, it becomes more important that the audience perceiving the conversation comes to the realization that there is an error being made here on their part than necessarily the individual. So it really depends on I mean, I prefer, rather than lecturing. I mean, sometimes it's necessary to be like, okay, this is that fallacy, this is this fallacy, this is why what you're saying doesn't follow. But I prefer sort of silently, and this is going to sound kind of shitty, but I don't mean it in a manipulative way, but setting them up for them to recognize their own error. Rather than me lecturing at them, I'd rather ask questions, see where they accept certain premises, and then at the end sort of turn around on them and show, well, this is why this doesn't add up. And you said this here, but then this other thing you're saying here contradicts your initial statement. And you kind of see the realization wash over them that, okay, there is an issue here. And depending on how intellectually honest they are, the leader sort of reassess their belief system and maybe refine it or come out of it with a different perspective. Or they'll just kind of tune it out and go back to the same kind of narrative. And I've seen that happen too, where there have been conversations I've had with people that literally they had nothing, they had no response, and they knew they had nothing. And then like 2 days later, I'm seeing them make the same arguments on another channel or on TikTok, or like sort of reverting right back, like that conversation that didn't even happen. So it really depends.
Do you sometimes think it just goes over their head, the rationality of why their argument doesn't work? Or do you think they're just being generally dishonest?
I think it's both. I think for some people, they just may honestly just lack the awareness to really connect the dots. Other people recognize it, and you see them recognize it, but that emotional pull of what they want to be true is so strong that they'll ignore sort of reality.
Yeah, so a little bit of cognitive dissonance.
Absolutely, yeah. And because it's hard when you find yourself in with the idea that you this life is short and there's likely not going to be a heaven for you to go to, or you're not going to see your loved ones again, and life is difficult, and we want to feel like there is a crutch, or also just people have really powerful transformative experiences, and they want to attribute a certain kind of meaning to that. And what people don't realize is that atheists are having the same experiences, Hindus, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists. The fact that we're all having these very powerful experiences of connectedness to nature and otherwise suggests that there's a deeper principle there that goes beyond any particular culture. And yet, people so often, religious people want to say, well, I've had this deep experience within the context of Christianity, therefore Christianity is true.
Yes.
And it's just not the case. So it's hard to ultimately to reach people and get them to see where the problems lie.
You mentioned that, like one thing that religion has to offer is that they kind of give people a sense of meaning, gives them kind of the hope that there is a little bit more beyond this life, stuff like that. Does philosophy as a whole have something to offer for people without the strings of this is the only way you can be a good person, or this is the only way your life has meaning, or something beyond that? Can it help with people who are struggling with the fact that we are just kind of what we are, just meat robots?
It has a tremendous amount to offer. The problem is that a lot of people have very false views of physicalism and naturalism. Like they think that if we're just stuff, then nothing really matters.
Mm-hmm.
As though consciousness didn't exist. Like all you need for meaning and morality is the fact that consciousness is a phenomenon. And so I attribute things meaning because there's a difference in experience between a fulfilling experience and a non-fulfilling one. There's a difference in well-being and suffering. Like these are phenomenological truths that we can discover and understand the more science grows, the more philosophy grows. And the tradition of existentialism is so wide. I mean, there's so much literature out there that one can take a look at. And some of it comes from religious thinkers. Some of it comes from atheistic and humanist thinkers. And a lot of it, does recognize that there's a kind of absurdity to life, or rather than be crushed by that realization, you figure out that you can embrace that and actually come to peace with that and use it as a tool to make your life what you want it to. And there's a lot out there to digest, and I'm not here saying that there's necessarily one right way of looking at it, although I have my personal beliefs as to what I think makes the most sense. But I would say for anyone listening, put in the work and the time to really examine what the best thinkers have had to offer to these questions, and then arrive at your own conclusions. If you want to live a better life, it requires work to do that. It requires going through a discerned deconstruction and really, how would I say this? Putting in the time and the effort to look at these questions honestly and try to answer them honestly.
Okay.
Yeah, so something. I'm just thinking of a question now. Something that we're trying to do here at the Promethean movement is we're trying to find a way to bring together everybody as a human race. So there's no segregation between religion and nations and all of these concepts that are separating us as a human race. What do you in a philosophical sense? How do you think we could go about making that happen for the future?
Yeah, so in that context, there's a lot of. It's hard because while we do have moral drives within us to collaborate, to build friendships, to build community, we also have very destructive drives to have us versus them type of thinking, to be stuck in a clan mentality. So we have this sort of contradictory drives operating simultaneously. And there is a lot of philosophy that can definitely assist in moving from one end of the spectrum towards another. So, humanism is very important in breaking down those walls, recognizing the similarities between us, between humans and also animals. Like, animal ethics, I think, is incredibly valuable. There is one particular philosopher who I have my disagreements with, but there are certain things that he put forward that I found very interesting, because while I think empathy for the other is extremely useful, it can also, Emmanuel Levinas is his name. Levinas put forward the notion that we must embrace the other also in their otherness, if possible. That if you're trying to diminish the other to yourself, that is its own form of violence, if that is the only way in which you're relating to the other. It is better to, when possible, embrace their uniqueness. And he talks about how we find ourselves automatically in this kind of engagement with the other, in their gaze, and it's easy to feel threatened, and feel objectified by the coming into relationship with the other. And so, how do we navigate that space? If we can find empathy, if we can find common ground, but if we can also try to accept and embrace the difference between people, those are sort of, I think, the tools that can move us to function better as a global community. Now, okay, it depends on the context you're talking about. Like, I would never be tolerant towards intolerance. Like, I don't have to accept or embrace somebody's bigotry, obviously. Like, that's not what I mean.
Yeah.
But it's understanding that people have, in certain contexts, have a different experience to mine, and that's okay. And I don't have to fear what I don't understand. I can try to understand it. And these are things that are difficult, because I think in a lot of ways our instincts are to want to protect ourselves and our tribe, and it's easy to shut the other out and to find the other as a threat, and it's going to take a lot of work to undo that kind of perspective.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because when I've thought about the question before, I've always tried to think of it in the terms of, we need to start thinking of ourselves as all being one. We're all one and the same as humans. But it's quite interesting that you need to also have that sense of difference as well, and that's obviously a key part of the human experience. So
yeah, at least accepting the differences and not letting them divide you.
Yeah, and recognizing that yes, we do share, regardless of race, orientation, or culture. There are certain things that are just phenomenologically true. Like, we all suffer. We all, to some degree, we want to live a happy life or a fulfilling life. It's just that all these cultures have different opinions as to what will lead to that goal, and that's where the conflict happens.
We do have some questions from the chat coming in as well, if you want me to ask those.
Go ahead.
So,
go for it.
Joshua is asking, does atheism lead to nihilism, or is that just a load of nonsense? Obviously, a question that atheists do get asked a lot.
Yeah, it's a common assumption, and again, this is by those that are just not very familiar with the field. There is nothing about. I mean, all atheism is not being convinced in a particular claim. Like, either I don't believe God exists because I haven't seen sufficient evidence, or out of some other type of argument. Doesn't it itself make any claims about morality, about meaning? Like, yes, it's possible to be an atheist and be immoral. It's also possible to be an atheist and be moral. It's possible to be an atheist and be a nihilist, and it's possible to be an atheist and have deep meaning. It matters what else you believe. Now, yes, if you've been conditioned and brainwashed to think that the only way to have meaning is if God provides that for you, and then that's taken away, well, of course you're going to sort of spiral into nihilism, because you only have been conditioned to think that meaning can be derived from this one particular context. But that says more about you psychologically than it does about belief systems and what's reasonable to believe. I think that it's actually the other way around. The fact that this life is finite provides me with more meaning. Like, I recognize that this life is finite. And therefore I want to try to make the best out of this life that I can, and with the people that I encounter. And the fact that it's going to end doesn't remove meaning whatsoever from my life. I find meaning because I'm alive. It's like, and the fact that I'm gonna one day die is irrelevant. It's like saying a song isn't less beautiful because it ends eventually. Like the experience of severe suffering doesn't cease to be what it is because I can also experience well-being. Like, if I burn my hand, like, that experience is that experience. The fact that one day I'm going to be dead doesn't mean that I'm going to not put my hand away from the flame.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if I explained that very well, but it's late. But yeah,
No, you're doing fine.
I just don't think that I don't think that meaning has anything to do with afterlife or some kind of cosmic, the universe doesn't give a shit about me. Like, it doesn't have a sentience to care, but I do. I care about my life. The people that that are in my life care about my life, and the fact that someday that's going to be gone, it doesn't matter because I'm living it.
Exactly. Yeah. I do remember, like, one of the first times that I told somebody that I knew that I was a non-believer. And this is a person I've known for a long time. And so, they've known my personality. They know, I'm kind of, a lot of people describe me, kind of full of energy, a lot of life, sense of humor, very positive, really enjoy being around people and stuff like that. But we got on the conversation of religion, and just little dropping hints, not intentionally, kind of mentioning it's like, well, I don't believe in any of that stuff. And I remember she said, "Are you an atheist? You don't believe in this?" I said, "No, I don't find sufficient evidence for me to believe in any claims for any gods." And her expression just went stone cold, and it was just like, "Are you a nihilist?" And it was like, for me, it was like shocking that somebody would even ask that, because it's like, my personality, my interests, I've said that the whole goal in life is to make the world a better place. Why would you even associate it with that? And it just kind of at that point, sprung on me that, it really is just this gut reaction. It's this unfounded assumption that there's no base in reality for.
Yeah, it's just ignorance. It's ignorance, and it's also narcissism, because it's being unable to recognize that there's a whole other world out there that's beyond your experience.
Exactly.
And so, like I was saying earlier, the older I get, the less patient I become with that kind of mentality. Especially from older people, because it's like, it's your responsibility to educate yourself about reality. It's not necessarily mine. and especially this someone who knows you and knows your personality, to just kind of, I mean, atheists get such a bad reputation, especially in this country. I mean, the amount of times that I've been called a Satanist because I don't believe in God. It's like, no,
Yeah.
I don't believe in Satan either. Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just delusional, and it just, all we can do is try to educate as best we can, as patiently as we can, and it just is what it is.
Were there any more questions in the chat, Katie?
I was just having a look through. Cat the Humanist wanted to know, could you elaborate a little more on what you meant by outdated philosophy, examples, and what are better, more updated schools of thought?
And what was the context of that? Was that in the context of morality or meaning? Or
I think that went back to when we were discussing how some theists use what you said was outdated philosophy to help justify
sure.
the existence of God.
Oh, right, yeah. So I think, so St. Aquinas' 5 proofs, the idea of the uncaused cause, the unactualized actualizer, this idea that things like the Kalam argument. So everything that comes into being is caused by something else. The universe came into being, so the universe must be caused by something else. That cause is God. It has to be a mind. These are all things that completely fall apart in light of modern physics. The whole notion of cause and effect is, becomes quite unclear in this new context, where in physics, cause and effect is actually emergent, not fundamental. And one way to explain this is when you think of reading a book, and I have some philosophical issues with this. I don't like this idea, but I struggle with understanding it fully. But the way it's been described to me is, you think of a book, you think of a book is broken down in chapters. There's the first chapter, the middle chapter, the last chapter, whatever. But you read the book, and you sort of, this narrative emerges from the way you read the book. But the last chapter exists the same way that the first chapter exists. Like they both exist. It's not that one is potential. They both exist within the book. You just haven't gotten to that chapter yet. In many ways, in physics, the past, the present, and the future is viewed in the same way, where these are all things that simultaneously exist, are just different points on this timeline. So space and time are actually interconnected in physics. So in this context, if you were to look at a videotape of you dropping a glass and the glass shattering, and you saw the tape backwards from the shattering of the glass into the glass coming back, all the pieces coming back into form in the glass, nothing there about it being viewed backwards would violate the laws of physics, which is a problem for any religious person trying to invoke causality and talking about needing God as a first cause for everything. There's also a lot of assumptions that old theology makes about our access to ontology, which is ontology is the nature of being, like what is reality. A lot of more modern philosophy, and even some ancient philosophy, but especially more modern, have really deconstructed many of the things that we assume to be true about things that we took for granted, whether it's our perceptions of the world, whether it's the ease with which we can justify beliefs. It turns out it's actually much more difficult. And the highlighting on the fact that ultimately we're operating in a certain mode of consciousness that we can't step out of. So all we can really do is talk about our perception. But it's like an ant perceives what it perceives, but it's unaware of a vast larger world beyond what it knows, and in a way, it kind of translates to us where we can talk about our. I think Wittgenstein talks about it as our field of vision, but we can't talk about what's beyond that. So phrases that religious people want to use, like, well, God exists outside of space and time, are meaningless, are linguistically meaningless, because the only context in which we understand existence to begin with is one that assumes a spatial existence, like, or a spatial framework or a temporal framework. And so it's just a misuse of terminology. There's a lot there to unpack, but it's I would say, look at the criticisms of the five proofs. Look at the criticism of Thomism, and yeah, that would be a decent starting point. I'm trying to think if there's any particular thinkers I can think of. I'm not sure at the moment off the top of my head, but yeah. I hope that answered her question.
Sounds good to me. So, like, especially people like me, kind of have this vision of philosophers as, the stuffy old people, wearing the robes and the sandals and stuff like that. Or being locked away in a library for most of your life. Do you have like a aha moment, or that cool moment where you realize something that just really gave you that, like, a big smile, or something that just really was that clarity moment that really clicked with you?
Yeah, it's, again, and I can only talk about my experience, because even among my peers, my friends who go to school with me, we all have a very different experience of what it's like to do philosophy. Like, for some of my peers, they find it a very spiritual and, a source of peace. And they'll have those moments where they find what they think is the answer, and it's like pure pleasure and eureka, and like, there we go. My experience is more of, and I think this is kind of just the way my mind works, is before I find what I agree with any particular thinker, I immediately find what I disagree with. And so mine, it's more like an OCD, and I love philosophy, I enjoy it, it's my life, but it's almost more of like an OCD frustration, where it's like, no, this is wrong, that's wrong, and trying to sort of find the answer through the process of elimination of concepts that ultimately I think fail to meet the standard. And now there have been those moments where, yes, I think I found an answer, and that's extremely powerful and pleasurable in its own way. I think more so philosophy opens questions and helps us understand our place in the world, rather than provide specific answers to things. It's more like, well, even just in having these questions, I'm in a better place than I was beforehand, because now I'm closer to understanding really what my human condition is. But there have been things that I feel now quite strongly about. Like, my argument for morality is, I believe, is pretty concrete. It's pretty strong, and I think those that disagree with it are usually trying to avoid some of my points. The other part of philosophy that I feel very strongly about is I'm something called a non-reductive physicalist, which is, I believe consciousness is a physical process.
Okay.
I just don't think the physical description of it fully captures the phenomena. because I think language is secondary to phenomena.
Okay.
That's something that intuitively makes a lot of sense to me. That I think, the hard problem of consciousness isn't something that can be completely resolved the way people want it to, and I'm okay with that. And so I'm at peace with that. I'm less convinced on that issue than the issue of morality. But I think those two things make the most sense. I feel like I'm the most clear on. But to anyone listening, one piece of work that I would recommend is a French philosopher, phenomenologist by the name of Merleau-Ponty. I'm not sure how to spell his first name, but he wrote a work called The Phenomenology of Perception, where he talks about different psychological studies of people who suffered brain damage and how that brain damage affected the ways in which they could interact with the world and the ways in which they could experience the world. And so it's in observing the differences and the uniqueness of people's conditions that was very useful in illuminating sort of a shared nature of everybody else. And I think that was very, very powerful. And yeah. So.
Sounds good. Katie, I noticed we lost you for a second, but do you have any other questions for the moment? Again, feel like I'm talking way too much.
Oh no, I'm just setting up things up for the after party and the intermission screen and that. So I'm just working in the
Sounds
background.
good. I just saw you blink out, so I was getting worried for a second.
Yeah, no. So if you want to continue on for like another 5 minutes, and then I'll
sounds good.
I'll lead us out. And
I know you've mentioned a few great books for people to read. What would you recommend for somebody like me, who's like literally the self-proclaimed dumbest person in the room? Where would somebody get started if they have a very low grasp of, philosophy and logical arguments and everything like that? Just a good way to kind of get a basic handle on it.
Yeah. So like I said, I think the first step would probably be examining what logical fallacies are.
Do you have any books that you'd recommend for that specifically?
Trying to think. I can't think of particular books off the top of my head, but even just like, there's even videos on YouTube like Philosophy 101, logical fallacies, okay. or just look at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, logical fallacies. That resource has everything. But one good place to start is René Descartes, his philosophical meditations. Now, he is a theist, and his proof for God is complete delusion, but his original deconstruction of, what he does in the beginning is, I want to try to remove everything that I assume is the case. Like, that I'm a person, that the world exists, that the other... Like, what can I say to know without a shadow of a doubt? And is there such a thing? Can I know anything? And he arrives at the conclusion that at least if he knows nothing else, he knows that he exists. And this is the famous, I think, therefore I am. I can't think and not exist. And so that's called the cogito. So from there, it's like he lays the foundation to then, okay, well then how do I rebuild my beliefs about the world, and can I infer anything else from that starting point? And so that might, in any introduction to philosophy, any course you take, even as an undergrad, usually the starting point is Descartes. And it also depends on your particular interest. Like, if you're more interested in philosophy of mind than you are in morality, that would change my answer. It really kind of depends on, But I mean, there's just books that are just like, okay, introduction to philosophy. There are courses you can take online. There's introductory YouTube videos you can find, and see, I'm because I'm so like within, like I'm so in it. It's the books that come to mind that I find valuable are way more in depth than I think what you've been interested in.
Right.
And so
You gotta dumb
I'm
this
trying to sort
down
of
for me.
remember. No, it's not an issue of intelligence. It just sort of exposure to material. Like I don't think yeah. I mean, I don't know you, but you seem to be pretty bright to me. Like I'm sure with time
I thank you. And I didn't pay him to say that, by the way, everyone.
yeah. It's we all have to start somewhere, right? Like I had to start from not knowing anything, and then over the years, like the more you read, the more you expose yourself to these ideas, and then you kind of follow through the tradition, and then you see which thinkers affected which thinkers, and then you can sort of bridge like, okay, so X philosopher was influenced by Y philosopher, and you kind of the pieces start to fall together.
For anyone who is maybe leaving, let's say, for instance, like a cult, a religious cult, and they've had many years of being taught how to, what to think instead of how to think, and they're wanting to, they're on the process of waking up from that, and they're wanting to, move gently into trying to rebuild those foundations of how to think. Is there any YouTubers or online video material that you would suggest to those people to?
Yeah, so I know that there are resources. Again, I wish that I thought of this before coming on, but I know there are different foundations and resources for people that have left cults and have suffered religious trauma, that are there to sort of help you ease through the transition from that kind of lifestyle to this sort of a new life. I know that I mean, I don't know how familiar you guys are with the Atheist Roundtable, Tart on YouTube. I know that they've provided certain links, and they are good. Oz, who runs one of the guys that runs that channel, he was very entrenched in that culture for most of his life, and only recently has come out of it. And he has that kind of testimony on his channel, and that's someone to potentially reach out to. There are a lot of other TikTokers that are coming out with ex-Mormons or this cult and that cult. I wish that I could remember specifically their links or channels and stuff, but I would just keep an eye out. I mean, I just do some research, and I think the Atheist Roundtable is a good place to start, because I think they have a lot of good connections in as far as that type of thing. And but yeah, and like I said, if once you try to learn how to think, just find very introductory videos and books on philosophy. Like there literally are books that say introduction to philosophy. Sort of and they will provide a sort of general sort of timeline of certain ideas, and work your way up from there.
Yeah. And finally, for anybody who's wanting to, start researching philosophy and and take up that that journey of learning epistemology and things like that, have you got any sort of advice for them on, to stop them from getting disheartened by certain things?
Yeah, just be patient and don't be afraid to reach out to people who are, actually within the field. I mean, don't be afraid to, the same way that, like, for example, I was really bad at math. I've always been terrible with numbers. I had to get a tutor to try to sort of make sense of the stuff. Like, don't be afraid to try to find that. I mean, I'll give my email for my channel. It's axiomsontrial@gmail.com. My channel on YouTube is Axioms on Trial. Don't be afraid to, shoot me an email, and you can ask more specifically what it is that you're looking to figure out or understand, where you're at in your life at this moment in time. And like, I'm looking to teach for a living, so I'd be happy, doing some kind of basic mentoring and that type of thing. I'm never going to tell you what to think, just how to, like, the best ways to be as intellectually honest as possible.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
And if you send me all your links and everything after the show, I will put them in the description of the channel as well, of this
Certainly.
video.
Thank you.
Yeah, you mentioned your channel. When can they find your show on? Go ahead and plug away.
Yeah, so the show is on YouTube right now. We'll probably put it on other platforms as well, but for now it's just YouTube. It's Axioms on Trial. That's AXIOMS, and then on trial. I host the podcast with J Mike, who's formerly on the Atheist Roundtable. He used to co-host that show, and then he left that show and is now doing this project with me. And we have anybody from TikTokers to scholars to scientists to theologians. One recurring guest is a physicist, a black hole cosmologist who's actually my brother.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
And so he and I talk about a lot of these issues, and he's a recurring guest. So we do usually like 1 or 2 shows a week, and the schedule is a little bit random. Like, we try to do Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, but like sometimes between work and other things, the days kind of get mixed up. Like, tomorrow we're doing a show with Shannon Q.
Okay.
She's going to be on. Hopefully anybody listening will check it out and enjoy it, and feel free to comment and shoot us an email.
Yeah, so for anyone in the chat, I would definitely suggest checking out CeaseToKnow on YouTube. Not CeaseToKnow, Axioms on Trial on YouTube. Very good channel over there. I've been checking it out myself, and extremely good content.
Appreciate it.
I think I speak for everyone in saying, thank you for providing that, the information that you do. It's
Absolutely.
And thanks for everyone who's been joining and tuning in, and we're doing this for you guys as well. So
so thank you very much for coming on, CeaseToKnow. It's been absolutely great conversation we've had. We will be having a little bit of an after party if you wanting to stick around for a bit.
Sure, I can stay for a little bit longer. I don't know how long I can stay, but I'll stay for a bit before I.
No worries. Whenever you need to leave, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
We won't chain you down.
It's just.
I'll send you this link.
General conversation, so we invite a few people in and just have a general conversation. Give those in the chat a chance to just have a conversation with you as well.
Sounds good.
So I'll explain what's going to happen. So we're going to go to intermission for around about 5 minutes, play some music for you while we get things set up for the after party. I will put a link to the after party in the chat for anyone that wants to join in. If you do join in and you're using a mobile phone, please join without video, just the audio. Otherwise, it can cause problems in the stream. But if you're on a PC or Mac or what have you, then feel free to join in with video as well.
So we can see your smiling faces.
Yes. And if you're not going to stick around, thank you very much for watching. I hope we've been entertaining and informative tonight.
Absolutely.
And please check us out every week. Thursdays. That was the old schedule. Wednesdays, 9 p.m. Eastern time is when you'll be able to find us. So thank you very much for watching, and good night.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Left you too soon. So young at heart, yet you feel so much older under your favorite full moon. So trust a little time, so to be afraid. Just a little time, gonna make it fade. Your heart is gonna shine and you're gonna make us proud. Send a little light, gonna shine for you. Things will be alright, gonna get you through. Searching for a silver lining on this cloud. Amnesia, you forgot your name. Don't let your spirit fade away. Amnesia, you've been through such pain, but your little heart is growing stronger every day. Hey, don't fade away. Don't fade away. Amnesia, you've got this burden to bear now, hiding away from the world. But deep down behind that disguise that you wear now, I see a lost little girl. So trust a little sign, so you be afraid. Just a little time, gonna make it fade. Your heart is gonna shine and you're gonna make us proud. Send a little light, gonna shine for you. Things will be alright, gonna get you through. Searching for a silver lining on this cloud. Amnesia, you forgot your name. Don't let your spirit fade away. Amnesia, you've been through such pain, but your little heart is growing stronger every day. Hey, don't fade away. forgot your name. Don't let your spirit fade away. Amnesia, you've been through such pain, but you're growing stronger every day. Amnesia, you forgot your name. Don't let your spirit fade away. Amnesia, you've been through such pain, but your little heart is growing stronger every day. Hey, don't fade away. Don't fade away. Don't fade away. Come on. Don't fade away. When the world is on your shoulders, stay. Don't fade away. Down. Smoke over the city soul pollutes our sons and daughters. Ooh. You can fall asleep on sheets of gold and wake up as a pauper. We all get old, we all slow down as the walls they close. We fall, we drown, and I need some breathing space. I won't grow old with grace. I need some breathing space. I can't keep living straight. Oh, we ain't gonna linger and wallow when there's hard cash coming back. No way, I'll just sit here when I know that there's hard cash coming back. Hard cash. Don't want no easy money. Oh no. Money couldn't buy me happiness, just a prettier misery. There's a price to pay for a life of luxury. Oh, the air is thin, the glare, the smoke and the wear within. It tears, it's choking. I need some breathing space. I won't grow old with grace. I need some breathing space. I can't keep living straight. Oh, we ain't gonna linger and wallow when there's hard cash coming back. No way, I'll just sit here when I know that there's hard cash coming back.
Right, hello everyone, and welcome to the after party for CeaseToKnow. Thank you very much for joining us. If you're in the chat, you can click the link to join if you do have any questions or you just want to join the conversation. The link is pinned to the top of the chat. So yeah, without any further ado, let's continue the conversation.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Josh, you
I
were
actu-
saying something.
Yeah, I actually have a question for you, Cease. Uh, the What do you think about positivism based from Auguste Comte?
In the context, you mean logical positivism?
Like, yeah, logical positivism.
Um, in many regards, it hasn't succeeded.
Agreed.
It's it's unfortunate because I definitely share some of its intuitions.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely ran into certain problems that um, that are it's hard to see how one can resolve or move past it. I guess the way that I look at it now is that I think of logic and language as descriptive as opposed to prescriptive, and so I these are imperfect tools to try to make sense of the reality we are part of. But we can't talk about universals, or we can't talk about anything beyond, like I was saying earlier, our sort of our field of vision. But I don't think it's as sort of broken as some people do. But I also recognize that it's definitely there are some issues there.
Right, right. And I completely agree with you. I don't agree with everything that Auguste Comte actually stated, but the aspect of the breakdown between those who are, or what he believes is that you start off as in the theology camp, then after you move into the metaphysics camp, once you slowly start to, I don't want to say transmutate because that's not the proper word to state, but when when your brain starts to go through its understandings and more learning and more concepts, it slowly starts to go into metaphysics. And then after the metaphysical aspect, he says that the final aspect is a sense of, I don't want to say scientism because he didn't say it in that way, but he said like a naturalistic perspective will come about, so that there's three tiers within human understanding.
The problem with that is that even naturalism is a metaphysical position.
I agree with you. I agree with you on that.
Now, obviously, I am a naturalist. I think that's what makes the most sense.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, I get what you're saying.
Right. But I think the issue, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the issue is that Augustus Comte, he tried to bring something that was new, but he was utilizing things that were based on an old concept in a sense. So he was trying to bring Christianity into the more naturalistic perspective for his time. He came out of the French Revolution thinking that people needed to have some sort of tradition with their philosophy in a sense.
So I would have to look at because I'm not very familiar with his work.
Oh, okay.
I think I thought you were referring to something different when you mentioned positivism.
Okay.
I would have to sort of take a look. It seems to me that there can be certain things within religious traditions that are valuable, that touch on things like meaning or morality or different ways in which to organize your life. But there is so much sort of barbarism and supernatural assumptions and just lack of knowledge of just sort of reality that I'm of the camp that it's better to leave the stuff behind and yes, take the existential questions found also in religion, but just remove the baggage from it and I don't know how to verbalize this, but like I don't
So-
think I'll phrase it this way. I don't think that the mythology is necessary. I don't think the types of storytelling within the religious context is necessary for those conversations.
I completely agree with that assumption, and I think that what people needed, because just like how you stated, a lot of people when they come into, and I'm sorry about kind of jumping from subject to subject, but they kind of do coalesce into one sort of actual main subject. And I think that when we look at atheists to begin with, atheists, agnostics, or maybe just non-believers in general, because there's a plethora of symbols or plethora of names that unbelievers come in, or whatever. You have natural pantheists and so on and so forth. So, and panpsychists and so on. But the issue that I find is that a lot of individuals or a lot of non-believers do have this, I believe, an existential crisis sometimes that they run into. That when something bad happens, or that they run into a death in the family, or something towards that extent, that it's like they are missing something in a sense. It's like there's an essence that's not there, and they try to reach for that in different ways and different meanings.
I think it's true that to some degree, religion does offer something that both atheism and in some ways existentialism doesn't offer, which is a certain kind of comfort. You can still achieve the comfort, but it's in a very different way. Like, it's not going to be the comfort where you believe in a happy ending where you go to heaven and see your grandma. Like, that's just not the reality. But it's so yeah, when something bad happens, it's not as easy to dismiss as, well, it's God's will, or God is testing me, or everything happens for a reason. Like, yes, I can make it into that in the sense that I can still learn something from what happened that's bad. But there's no like guiding thing or destiny that made it so. It just shit happens, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And but for me, I found peace in sort of what's the word I'm looking for? This is where being bilingual is a problem, because I forget both the Italian and the English terminology. I found peace in embracing the chaos, in embracing the fact that, yes, life in many ways is absurd. Things happen that, like, that don't seem to make sense. Good things, bad things. Like, there's no telling. Next week my whole life could be changed by something, catastrophic. And it is what it is. Like, it's ultimately, that's the reality. I can choose, and this is where kind of my Buddhist background comes in, where I can choose to fight that reality and be anxious about it, and wish it was different, and struggle with things that take place and become a victim to those things, or I can let go, and I can let whatever happens, and it's the usual example of the river. Like, I can try to fight the current, but I'm not going to beat it. So might as well let myself go to the current and see where life takes me, and enjoy the ride for what it is, and deal with what happens as it comes.
No, that's actually a really good answer to that question, because I do think, though, that there is a philosophical question to certain or extraordinary suffering, in a sense, or maybe not extraordinary suffering. That might not be the proper word, but a suffering that will lead people into questioning why they are a non-believer to begin with, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for me, and I think this is where the ethics comes in, because for me, I think that there is a necessity for people to want to feel reconnected with long lost ones or people who have
yeah.
passed away.
Sure.
They want to have some sort of connection to that. And in whichever way, it can be based on symbolism, traditionalism, even religiosism, which is not traditionalism in a sense. It's its own little thing that you believe that you're going to go up to heaven afterwards and see them once again, or whatever the situation may be. And for me, I think that even secularists can have that answer. But the answer isn't going to be, in my opinion, how could I say it? Isn't necessarily going to be just within the mind itself, where you're just thinking about the person you lost. I think that we can ebb this thought process by utilizing technology. I think that can actually happen. And what I mean by this is that if you have somebody who is gone, you can have, let's just say, specific archives of the individual if we get towards that point. And those archives could be passed down to family and generations afterwards, which can then embrace and remember that specific person. But even though that they're not really there, it's the archive itself with the videos and the logs and so on and so forth, which can give that connectivity to those who have lost that family member.
So a few things there. One is, I mean, as far as that is concerned, we're already there. I mean, the internet, a lot of ways is that, right? I do think that is not quite, doesn't quite satisfy what people really want, which is a continued connection with that person.
Yeah.
And I don't think, and again, I think it's normal for people to want to live forever. I don't share that necessarily that desire.
Me neither.
But I can recognize why some might. But I'm a little confused as to something you said, because when something bad happens in a godless universe,
Mm-hmm.
there's no mystery there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's more so.
Yeah.
It's more so when something terrible happens in a universe where you're told that God loves you and is there for you. The problem of evil, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
It's often when something bad happens where people have a test of their religious faith and perhaps come out of it becoming a non-believer, because like, well, how could this happen to me if God loves me? But from the non-religious perspective, like as a non-believer, if something bad happens, like, yeah, this happens in life sometimes. Like bad things happen. There's no confusion there. There's no challenge to my beliefs. This is what we would expect in a universe that isn't ruled by a non-loving creator.
I completely agree with you, and I'm in the same line as you, but same thought process as you. But the thing is that I think that a lot of people, because of that religious upbringing, there's still that inkling that's there, even though that they are atheists and stuff like that, or whatever other spectrum of non-believer they are.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is still that tendency that still lingers in the back of their mind. And it's not necessarily the tendency of believing in a God, but it's a tendency of wanting to see that loved one again or that family member. And
Sure.
I think that with certain people, not all people, but with certain people, when that happens, it literally brings out the opposite, in a sense, of what as you said, with a religious individual, because for them, or for a religious person, as you stated, why would God do this to me? But in the opposite spectrum, it's kind of like, well, now this is a person that I love so much, and now they're gone, and I can't necessarily deal with that. Henceforth, let me actually delve into these belief systems and these religious thought processes because I miss this person so much. So I
Oh,
think,
okay, I get what you're saying.
yeah. So I think that there needs to be a sense of milieu, like a middle, in a sense, a middle ground, where it's not necessarily like, oh, okay, you're going to go to heaven and you're going to do this, because for me that's just wishful thinking, because I'm in the same line as you. I think that I take it a bit further than you do, because I'm a Gnostic atheist. I think that there is no such thing as God, and that there are no gods out there 100%. That these are just ideas that human, or not just human beings, but um, hominids came up with. And definitely, if we're talking about Homo heidelbergensis, Homo neanderthalis, and Homo sapien, in a sense, and that thought process came way later, around 60,000 years ago.
So I would say this, that I completely agree that people have this desire, like there are these tendencies innate in us, these intuitions, or this wishful thinking, or the psychological need for certain types of comfort. Like, yes, you lose a parent, you lose a loved one. How do I deal with that? The pain is so severe. Well, let me then construct or fall into a narrative that tries to placate that suffering. But that's where intellectual honesty comes in. Like, what is it that you're trying to do with your life? Like, I'm driven by wanting to understand my reality and existence, and what is true about the world. So wishful thinking is never, and even if I may feel, the trauma of having lost somebody, and I do,
Likewise.
I'm not going to. That's never going to become a factor in what it is I believe and what ideology I follow. And so there may be other ways. Ultimately, it's an issue of at some point you just have to grow up and face the difficulty of life head on. It is what, and either you're strong enough to do that, or you're not, and you fall into other kind of narratives. And so, as far as the agnostic atheism versus the Gnostic atheism, outside of the cogito, which is I think the 4 a.m. Certainty foundation that I have, I'm not certain about anything else, because I just as an observation of epistemology, I would need full access to ontology to talk about anything 100%. Like, you would need to know, you would have to experience every corner of the universe to be able to express with certainty that God doesn't exist. Again, depends on what you mean by knowledge. Like, if knowledge is justified true belief, that's one thing. I tend to think of knowledge as certainty, which is why most of what I talk about is not knowledge, but rather justified belief outside of the cogito, which is, I think, therefore I am, and you can really get underneath that.
Right. So for me, the reason why I held, because beforehand I was an agnostic atheist, but the thing is that going into anthropology and then archaeology later on, I started to realize that, and don't get me wrong, there are theologians who are also anthropologists and archaeologists too, but I think that some of them are kind of led by their biblical scriptures in a sense, and henceforth it kind of muddies the water of their anthropology and archaeology. But when you really I don't want to say really delve into it, because now I'm kind of, but anyways, I'm sorry. So when you go into definitely the anthropological aspect, there really does seem to be this reoccurring example of, there's not just the thought process of this one God. It was a step-by-step processes of individuals who slowly but surely came to these belief systems from running into issues and problems that they experienced within the world, and henceforth started off with small sort of tribal belief systems. When they amalgamated together into larger populations, they started creating polytheistic beliefs, or actually not polytheistic at first, but more of like a spiritualism in a sense, kind of like how you would see with the Native Americans, or how you would see with tribal groups within Africa, or tribal groups even within North America, within Nunavut, Kuujjuaq, and so on and so forth. So when I look at these and I see these kind of the breakdown, it leads me to see that this is where God came from. God didn't come from something from the outside and had a force onto human populations. Human populations created God based on certain things that they ran into. Then there were probably other individuals that started questioning that thing, like, why are you believing in this, whatever, this stream? Because look, if I put a tree across the stream, it's going to stop the water. Your God is kind of dead right now. So what are you going to do now? So they had to constantly think of more and more gods, and keep pushing the concept of God further and further away from where humans could reach them.
So, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think these gods and mythology are entirely human constructions. Like, I believe that we have every reason in the world to think that that's the case. However, I don't think you can derive certainty that no God exists from that. Like, it can be the case that, humans created a million gods, and the one after could be the real God. Like, do I believe that? No, absolutely not. I have no reason to. But that observation itself isn't enough to provide certainty that any one God of the traditions, or maybe a God that's none of the traditions, but is just a creating force beyond the human construction, could be present. It's every God that's been constructed in history could be a fabrication and still be an actual God out there. Do I believe that to be the case? Absolutely not. There's literally no reason, no argument, no piece of evidence that remotely suggests this. So I don't take that seriously whatsoever. But I stop before saying that I know there isn't a God, because I don't think, just as a epistemic technicality, I can make those kind of claims about anything, really. Like, I can't know that I'm not a brain in a vat, right? Like,
Good point.
So now, within that context, I can talk about my experience and the way reality seems to operate within that experience. Mm-hmm. And whether I'm a human being or a brain in a vat or the Matrix, like, the cogito still applies. And then there are different beliefs that are more likely and make more sense to believe than others. But I rarely talk about certainty, as my username says, CeaseToKnow. That's kind of where I get that from. It's just sort of doing away with certainty.
Oh, absolutely. But I think too, the reason why I've taken another reason why I've taken the Gnostic standpoint is because as of yet, I haven't had, as you stated, the evidence provided to me that there is something greater that is out there. And secondly, whenever somebody tries to explain a God, they can't get what they're explaining down pat. We still don't have an actual description of what a god is. Is it transcendental? Is it all the three omnis? Is it not? Is it absolute? Is it that people use so many different words and so many different thought processes to try to pinpoint what a god is, but these thought processes seem to miss the point every single time, because there's so much more than just a couple of words which could then describe this entity that certain or most individuals want to allude to.
Sure, but none of that can provide you. Like, I agree with everything you're saying. All these definitions are abstract and not really saying much. But again, none of that can provide you with the certainty and the knowledge that a god is impossible. Or I mean, there's nothing logically incoherent about the notion that a god could exist. So I don't think that any of what we're saying is enough to make that. Again, it might depend on we may be disagreeing on how we're defining knowledge. Maybe an issue of semantics of what we're describing as knowledge.
Good point.
But I don't know when I think of certainty or knowledge or like 100%, like I don't think you can rationally support making the claim that God doesn't exist 100%, because you would have to experience all of the universe for all of time to be able to make that claim, in my opinion.
Oh no, you're right about that, and definitely we're just looking at the spectrum of Earth and the cultures that have developed on this planet, and let alone this speck of dust within this large cosmos and everything like that. How could I state that? Oh, okay, there is no God. But the thing is that to me, it's not just the evidence, it just seems completely and absolutely ridiculous, this conception. And I think that, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to preach Gnostic atheism to other individuals. This is just the road that I ran down into. But this does not also mean that I am concrete within this Gnostic thought process. It just means that at the moment, with all the information that I have amalgamated together, the Gnostic process comes out. When there's more evidence that kind of, oh, well, how about this? How about that? And that really makes me start to think and be like, okay, that's true. I'm not particularly sure about that. But for me, the thought process of a entity, which could be, I don't know, elsewhere in the universe, and I need to experience the whole universe in order to try to pinpoint this deity, already causes a problem with that thought process. Because if it's not, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you have to see it to believe it. There's a lot of things that we don't see, but yet we have the tools in order to actually calculate, measure it, and see it, in a sense. But when we're talking about God, there's always a problem based on the sense that this entity, if it does exist, is in just another natural point of nature itself, and not necessarily something that is above nature. It is just another subset of what nature is that we just didn't calculate yet. And henceforth, I can't necessarily call that a god. I can call it maybe a force, just like a force of gravity, but I can't call that a god. I can't call gravity a god, in a sense, or I can't call something that is intrinsic within nature itself a deity. I can be in awe of it, but
so how would I say this? I mean, I agree. Obviously, I agree with you that the notion of God is ridiculous, but I also don't think that the full extent of what nature is really accessible to us. And so I don't know, and it just seems to me that we can't talk about certainty as a matter of principle, because we can't really step outside of our own mode of thought. And so, because of that, we can't talk about what's objectively 100% the case outside of us. So whether something like outside of nature has any kind of linguistic meaning, which I don't think it does, but if there is a space where that's a thing, we can't know it or talk about it, so we have no reason to believe in it. But it doesn't mean that we can say that we know with certainty that it doesn't exist. But again, to me, it's an issue of semantics. Like, ultimately, what matters is what is the evidence for a claim, and if that claim lacks the evidence, then I don't believe in it. I don't need to talk about certainty. I think the Gnostic atheist perspective, I think, actually leaves you at a weakness philosophically, because they'll ask you what I said, which is, well, how do you know that? You would have to experience all of the universe to know that. And even if it sounds ridiculous, an argument from incredulity is also fallacious. Just because it seems ridiculous to you doesn't mean it's not true. Like, there are ways, like, anytime you talk about certainty, you're giving more ammunition than necessary to your opponent. So my perspective is, I can give you all the ammunition you want. Like, I'm not going to say miracles are impossible. I'm not going to say that I know a resurrection didn't happen. I don't need to know any of that. The only thing that matters when it comes to justifying claims is, what is your evidence? And if you don't have evidence, even without certainty, I can reject your claim from the start, because you don't have anything to justify that claim. So I don't need to disprove God. I don't need to disprove miracles. If you can't provide a good reason for me to accept that those things have actually taken place or exist, well, then I can just dismiss it.
Okay. I definitely see what you're stating, and I somewhat actually agree with you on that perspective. But for me, I think that and it is true, because when you're looking at a Gnostic standpoint on either end, on the atheist extreme or on the theologians extreme, what we do see is that there needs to be a providing of evidence. But because when we're talking about a deity, most individuals are not talking about a deity that is outside of their religious scripture. They're talking about a deity that is within that religious scripture. So for me, I just take that deity in itself, and I say, based on all the amalgamation of evidence that we do have, and based on everything that I've heard, based on conversations and individuals that are more knowledgeable in this area than I am, and what I can amalgamate is that it's not only there's no evidence, and it's not only that it's foolishness, as you said, is pure mythos. And I
sorry.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I agree with everything you said. I just think that, I think if anything, there's evidence on the other side that these notions are constructed by people and are not, don't make sense ultimately. But I don't think that all these things can provide us with certainty that Christianity isn't true, that Islam isn't true. We have good reasons to reject them. I just don't think we can be certain that they're false. Again, it depends on the interpretation as well.
Correct. There's different interpretations within Christianity and Islam, which are more, what I can see is more understandable. But for me, is that when we look at the whole of it and everything, if you keep chipping away at something continuously, and you slowly but surely are going to get to the bare bones of the situation. You might not get it right away, but through chipping away, you'll get to the bones of this thought process, of this symbol that people have come to really believe in. And when you can see that the whole entire not the tradition, the whole entire symbol is built on a sand mound, then I think that we can look at that and say there is a lot more evidence that this could be, not just could, that this is untrue. And if this is untrue, then why shouldn't we take the Gnostic perspective and say that because I think that now that's the dangerous aspect as well of agnostic atheism, for instance, is that the middle ground can be played for so long until you gotta kind of take that aspect. I think that
No, so I don't agree with that. I think the chipping away you're talking about doesn't lead to the knowledge that this is definitely false. It leads to the justified belief that it's likely false, but not to the certainty that it is false. Because again, how do you differentiate between, because maybe we can take 1,000 examples of constructions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you could have one that could be true revelation that just looks like a construction, but is actually the real revelation. Do I believe that? No, of course not. But we can only go so far with this type of thing you're referring to, which I think is important and necessary, but can't provide, as a matter of principle, can't provide certainty. It can only provide justified belief, and it can be a very strong justified belief.
Okay.
But not certainty itself. I don't feel the need as an agnostic atheist to have to pick one extreme or the other. I'm perfectly comfortable and happy saying I don't at all believe gods exist. I don't claim certainty because I don't think I can claim certainty for anything outside of the cogito. It's like my lack of certainty is only an epistemic technicality, based on the fact that I can't exist in all places at once and know everything at once. That's the only reason why I'm an agnostic, not because it's 50-50. Like, I don't think it's 50-50.
Okay.
So by agnostic, I don't mean the likelihood is on equal ground. It's absolutely not.
Okay.
I just mean I'm an agnostic in the sense that I don't have certainty. So I that's what I mean.
Okay, so you're saying that within a spectrum, that you're leaning, or actually maybe a spectrum is not necessarily a proper way of stating it.
No, I think it is. It's so if I think actually Dawkins wrote this in his book. There's he wrote a 1 to 7 scale between Gnostic theist and Gnostic atheist, and if number 7 is I know there is no God, he says that the most reasonable position is to be at number 6, which is I don't think there is a God. It's very unlikely that there is a God. I don't believe in a God. All the evidence points to no God, but I'm not going to claim certainty because I can't be sure. So it's not 50-50. It's like 99%.
Right, right. But no you're God, still leaving that 1%.
Because you have no choice but to do that. I think if one is being...
But I think, though, that I'm kind of within, because even though maybe me stating Gnostic isn't necessarily the right way of stating what I am, because as I said, I'm not like concrete within my thought process. But the thing is that when I look at specific entities and specific deities, for instance, just like with ghosts, for instance, for me, I don't believe in any of these type of things. Right. Or actually, the better thing, because people still claim that, oh, I've been haunted by ghosts and all the rest of that nonsense. So let me switch that. Vampires. Now, when we delve in to that mythos, the vampire mythos, which came from Vlad the Impaler, or majority of it came from Vlad the Impaler himself. what I can see is that there's a certain line that you look at it and you can be skeptical of it, but then all of a sudden it's kind of like, you know what? I can step inside that Gnostic box now, because we can try to be skeptical, or maybe we can try to be understanding. Now, I think that's the best way, because a lot of people think that when you're Gnostic, you're not understanding. You're just blinded, and you're kind of like a horse with blinders in a sense. But that's technically not true, or at least not true with me. But there's just some thought processes. It's the same as I think, and I hope that there's no kids that are watching this. But the tooth fairy, for instance, you can believe in the tooth fairy when you're younger, and it's understandable. But when you're older, you're not like, oh, okay, I missed a tooth. Let me put it underneath the pillow in order for me to get something, right? Like after a while, you step inside that Gnostic box, and you're like, well, there is no tooth fairy.
I think this is an issue of semantics. I think the way you're defining knowledge is not so much certainty, but more like the closest thing to that we can talk about. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to believe in the tooth fairy because technically I know there's no such thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and maybe, as you stated, it could be semantics. It could 100% could be semantics, and I'm not trying to say like, no, you're wrong. I'm just trying to look at it with other types of things that people used to believe in, such as fairies, such as maybe not, but like elves, for instance, and all the rest of these things. A lot of people used to believe these full-heartedly, but nowadays, if we look at those mythos, we can literally look at that and say, well, no, there isn't a true fairy. There isn't a true, like, maybe, now this is the thing, maybe there could be on another world something that is fairy-esque. Right. But when we're talking about here, where the mythos has come from, we can for sure stand inside the box of, are there fairies on Earth? No.
Right.
Guys,
I'm gonna be right back. Sorry, I'm gonna turn off my camera for a second.
Yeah.
Give me 5 minutes. I'll be right back.
All right. It's awesome. I love having this conversation.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, 1 sec. Give me 5 minutes and I'll be back.
Okay, it's cool.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think that's good.
That's good for me.
Josh can continue the conversation off air. But yeah, we can just go ahead and cut the stream.
I'm back. Sorry, I had to check something real quick.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah, for sure. But I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys having me. I like what you guys are doing. So
thank you.
I really do appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, it means a lot to us.
And that's why, for me, and I do agree with you, that whenever you start putting more and more emphasis on 100% knowledge, that is a difficult thing to stand behind. I do agree. I'm not stating that it's not. But at the same time, I really do think that with certain aspects that are out there, as you stated, like, yeah, you can be a 6 on certain aspects, because when we're talking about the grandiose of the universe itself, and let alone the grandioseness of this entity that we're talking about, it's I can see where you're coming from. But the problem for me is that if we can do that with every other thing prior to the belief of this God, so prior to anything, we can talk about Zeus, we can talk about everything, which are no longer entities or gods that are permeating within the world today. people could stand 100% on the Gnostic side and say, for sure, these gods didn't exist. All these gods are mythos. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not stating that this is what you're stating. I'm just stating that so many individuals that could look and have a hard time having a conversation or stating that I can't be 100% certain that God doesn't exist. But as soon as I bring in other gods, they're like, yeah, those gods obviously don't exist. So for me,
No,
I
would say, but actually, I would say that about anything. I don't think we can talk about certainty about any of that type of thing.
okay,
So,
cool.
Again, because we can't know that, and this is kind of what Descartes points to in his deconstruction of knowledge, is that how do we know that we're not under an illusion from the Descartes demon?
Right.
To talk about, again, it depends on how you define knowledge. If you mean it in a more extreme way, the way that I do when I'm talking about 100% certainty, then we can't be certain of anything except that we exist, just as a matter of fact. If we're talking about certainty a little bit less, in a little bit more of an open way, like a more of a colloquial way of what we mean by when people say "I know," not the philosophical know, but like I know the sun is going to come up tomorrow.
Right.
Do I know that? No, I don't. But do I have good reasons? Every reason to say no. I reasonably know that it's going to come up tomorrow. Sure, but it's not the same thing.
I completely agree with you, because seriously, tomorrow, because of the repetition, and I think that's the one thing that even with me that I kind of get misconstrued a bit, is that when we look at the repetition of something, we assume that that thing is going to perpetuate and continue on to the next day. Now, when we're talking about philosophically, I can definitely understand your position. I definitely can, and I'm not trying to say that your position is incorrect. That is not at all what I'm trying to say. I just think that within my thought process, that through the repetition and through what we have seen as a consistency, but does consistency mean that that's always going to be? No, because in the billions of years from now, the sun is going to go. Is going to turn into a red giant engulfing the earth itself. So obviously it's not going to be a continuous aspect of what we're going to see as the sun rising, or what we say the sun rising. It doesn't technically rise, but as we say the sun rising, what it does. But I can say, and even though that a lot of people, and definitely philosophers, would disagree with me what I'm about to say with this, but I would have 100% certainty that we will see the sun tomorrow. In some form or another, we will see the sun tomorrow. It can be a cloudy day, it can be a clear day, it can be whatever, but the sun will come about. And I think
you can't support that philosophically, because you don't know that you haven't been under a spell your whole life, and tomorrow will be broken, and you wake up and to discover that, again, these are not scenarios we should believe in or we have any reason to trust, but these are things that point to the problem of certainty, which you can't. Again, the burden of proof is on the person making the claim. So I'm not saying that you should believe what I'm saying, but it's also the case that you could. It could be the case that we're in a computer simulation, or Descartes' demon, and what we've experienced up to this point has been an illusion. And tomorrow, the demon snaps his fingers, and we realize that everything is actually nighttime. This is what I mean. Certainty is something that is not accessible to us, outside of, I can't think and not exist, just it's an incoherent thing. So that can't be the case. But outside of that, anything else is just the problem of induction. Like we can have very good reason, we can be 99.9999% sure of a certain claim, but we can't talk about it being 100% because, as a matter of principle, we don't have access to the ontology on that level.
You know what? I can definitely agree with that. I do see where you're coming from. And I think that understanding it more now on a philosophical term rather than, as you said, on a colloquial term, I think that I can agree. I think that I can state that it's it's not, as you stated, it's not a 50-50. It's definitely not a 50-50. But
Right.
I can say definitely if it is a spectrum, I am on a 6 or maybe even a 6.5 if that
No,
is
same
even
here. No,
to
I'm there as well.
yeah. So I think that because of that thought process, that it makes it seem, and even it made it seem to me until you eloquently uh, said that it was like a Gnostic position. It was sort of like but as you stated, it is true that there isn't necessarily 100% certainty of everything and or of anything, I mean to say. So if that is the case, then there does need to be skepticism that's there. But I think that and uh I hold on, let me try to get my thought process in order. I think that through or religious individuals might utilize that because they think that that's a sense of weakness. And I think that's also why I'd taken the Gnostic standpoint too, because even I thought of Gnostic atheism as a sense of weakness, as a sense of just I don't knows, without necessarily having uh, a congruent thought process, if that is
Yeah,
a
but
problem.
that's the error. Like I'm perfectly fine and happy with saying I don't know when that's the honest answer. I don't think it's a sign of weakness. I think it's a sign of intellectual honesty to acknowledge what our limitations are in our knowledge. Like when people say, "Well, if God didn't create the universe, what did?" I don't know. Well, oh, there. See, like your perspective has a weak. No, it doesn't. We don't. I don't know, and you don't either. The difference is you're pretending like you do, and I'm actually recognizing the fact that we're limited in what we understand, and it's actually naive to expect that we would somehow have the answers to something like that. And so I don't think it's a weakness at all. I think it's portrayed as that because people don't want to sort of acknowledge what our limitations are.
Right. And I guess because people also feel, and I think that even myself, or not even I think, even myself, we don't want to feel that we don't have control over things. So we want to try to have some certain amount of our we want to be certain within our knowledge. We want to be certain within our understanding and within our grounding of things. And I
I think
think
the more you do philosophy, all that baggage is going to evaporate.
I
All that desire for certainty and control and all these things, um, that you lose that once you realize that whether you like it or not, you don't have it, and so you come to accept the fact that you don't have it, and move on with that knowledge, um, because it's an illusion to think that you have it.
I
Um,
I can definitely agree, but oh, sorry, go ahead.
hey guys, thanks again.
Mm,
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
absolutely. Wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
I do believe, sorry to interrupt, I do believe next week we're going to be on a little earlier just because of our guest, but the normal time is 9 p.m. Eastern.
And
6 p.m.? No, 6 p.m. Eastern. Yeah. Looking forward to it.
and if anybody listening wants to catch my show, it's Axioms on Trial on YouTube.
Sounds awesome. Yes.
Absolutely.
Take care, everyone.
Oh dear, I've just given all my outro with the mic off, so you only heard everyone else but not me. Yeah, as I was saying, we're going to have David Livrieri on next week. That will be at 6 p.m. Eastern time, and then every other week we're going to be doing 9 p.m. Eastern time. So join us there. Join us then. Thank you. Stay home, stay safe, and save lives. Well, thank you and good night.
We ain't gonna linger and lie when there's hard cash coming back. We ain't gonna linger and lie when there's hard cash coming back. No way, I'll just sit here when I know that there's hard cash coming back. Hard cash. Don't want no easy money. Oh no. And now that we have all arrived, my friends get in your cars and drive. And now that we have all arrived, my friends get in your cars and drive. Gonna drive our blues away. Just another sunny day. Gonna drive our blues away. Just another sunny day. Can I get an amen? An amen now, brothers and sisters. Amen. Can I get an amen? An amen now, scatter that seed. Amen. Ooh. Bad devil's gonna rend your skin now. Won't pull you down to the mire. But my river's gonna cleanse your sin now. Safe from the righteous fire. Come, brothers and sisters. We'll give you everything you need. Come, brothers and sisters. We're scattering the Savior's seed. Free faith about by the force of my hand. You're bringing me a soul to save. Plans to filter from my great divine land. Hellfire upon their grave. Come, brothers and sisters, we'll give you everything you need. This world of mine, the earth is collapsing down. Step off the guilty path and come into this world of mine. The earth is collapsing down.